the Gangs and Narcotics Division as they were following and surveilling your suspects.
We did.
In addition to that, when you tracked the GPS trackers and the phone pings, did the information that you received appear to be consistent with the summaries of what Gangs and Narcotics was seeing in terms of tracking the defendant and Robert Baker to various bars and nightclubs?
Yes.
Also speculation.
The way the question was formed, that is true.
Did the data that you observed appear to be consistent with information you received from the people who were conducting surveillance?
That's overruled.
It did.
And was that, again, consistent with the data, the defendant and Baker going to various bars and nightclubs night after night?
Yes.
And did those dates cover, let's say, the night of February 19th into the early morning hours of February 20th?
Can I refer to my notes?
Yes.
Okay, what was the date again? I'm sorry?
February 19th into February 20th?
Yes.
February 21st into the early morning hours of February 22nd?
Yes.
February 23rd into the early morning hours of February 24th?
Yes.
February 25th into the early morning hours of February 26th?
Yes.
And after the defendant returned from a trip to Toronto that we heard or discussed in the recordings, March 3rd to March 4th?
Yes.
Nothing further on.
Mr. Levine.
Thank you. Good morning, Detective Bernard.
Good morning.
Is it fair to say that following the results of the DNA comparison, which you said matched the DNA of Robert Baker, that you were convinced that Mr. Baker was one of the killers in the of Fabio Sementilli?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. And did you arrest him?
He was arrested ultimately, yes.
Well, you found out that his DNA matched, I believe, on February 14th, 2017. Is that correct?
Correct.
That was just a couple of weeks after the murder?
Yeah, roughly 3 weeks.
Okay. And how did you obtain those results?
Well, first we obtained the blood swabs from the house and also the Porsche. They were collected, booked as evidence, requested for processing, and ultimately we received the results back. That's how it works.
And at that time, you had sufficient evidence to arrest Mr. Baker. Is that correct?
I guess you could have done it right away, yeah.
Well, you had proof that his blood was among, or perhaps all of the blood that was found at the scene, in the car, at the house, in the rooms, everywhere involving the crime scene and this murder. Is that correct?
Yes.
You had no results, or did you, of a second individual?
As far as DNA results,
Yes.
we did not.
Okay. So everything matched Mr. Baker.
Correct.
It matched no other suspect.
Correct. We knew we had outstanding suspects, though.
So at that point, you could have gone out and arrested Mr. Baker
Sure.
and confronted him with the DNA and any other questions you wish to ask him, if you wish to answer them, obviously.
Sure.
You chose not to.
Absolutely.
Okay. You knew there was a second killer involved in this case, correct?
That's correct.
And I assume, obviously, your investigation was focused on finding the second killer as well as Mr. Baker, correct?
Yes.
And between the date of January 17th or 18th until the DNA results came in, from the day of the murder until the DNA results came in, this was an investigation in which you had no idea at that point who the killers might be, correct?
Correct.
And you had no suspicion involving Monica Semintilli.
No.
At some point, when the DNA results came back for Mr. Baker, did you go to Miss Semintilli and tell her that we had discovered that the killer, or one of the killers in this case, was Robert Baker?
No.
And the reason you didn't do that is you had some belief that perhaps Miss Semintilli was having some kind of relationship, affair, if you will, with Mr. Baker. Is that correct?
Well, no, not really. It wasn't until, I believe, the interview on February 21st of 2017 that there was any inclination that there was an affair happening that I'm aware of. I think that was the first that I knew about something maybe going on.
And that was based on?
Well, when we interviewed Miss Semintilli, and Jessica was also there. Jessica was the one that told us that Mr. Baker had slept over. She also denied that Baker was ever at the residence, so there was some questions there.
There were some questions there.
Yeah.
And at that point, you could have confronted her, obviously, with that evidence and asked her to explain, correct?
I mean, there was some effort to make some questions.
Well, I mean, did you ever confront her and say, were you having an affair with Robert Baker?
No.
You asked her if she knew the name of Baker, and she said she thought the name was Robert Baker, correct?
Correct.
And at a later interview with her, she volunteered to you, or in response to a question, that he was the racquetball coach where she played racquetball at LA Fitness. Is that correct?
I think it was all around the same time, yes.
Okay. She gave you what you believed was the name, which was, in fact, the correct name, Robert Baker. And
Yes.
she told you he was a racquetball coach at LA Fitness. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So again, you said at the beginning you had no suspicion about Mrs. Semintilli being involved with Mr. Baker in any way.
Up until that point, no.
Okay. So how much time had passed between the date that you received the DNA results matching Mr. Baker with the blood at the scene and in the car until you received some information, whether it was from Jessica or someone else, that Mr. Baker had been over the house or there'd been some contact with him?
I'm sorry, the date from the DNA hit to the date that we were pretty much advised of there was something going on?
Right, and you said that was based on some conversations with Jessica about
Right.
him having slept over and so forth.
Yeah, I guess it was roughly 7 days a week, somewhere around there.
Okay. And during that time, why didn't you tell Mrs. Semintilli that the DNA results had come back to match a Robert Baker?
Because it's my responsibility and my partner's responsibility to work this case. So we have a duty to not only figure out who one person is, but to figure out who the second suspect is and if anything else is going on.
Okay. So the second suspect, obviously, you were aware of was the second killer. Is that correct?
Well, what we had a video showing two people running towards the residence. We had a
Correct.
video showing the Porsche leaving with two individuals in the Porsche, and that's what we had.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your investigation initially, when you were there the first day, you had no preconceived ideas as to what had happened here other than tragically one individual had been brutally killed, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then you ended up viewing a video tape of somebody or two individuals jogging up Victoria Street from Oakdale. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the person who notified you or supplied you with the information that there might be videotape was Monica Semintilli, correct?
I don't believe she was the only person that told us about videotape. I mean, there's cameras right when you turn that corner. It's very easy to see.
I understand.
So it didn't require someone to tell us necessarily that there was videotape at the corner.
But she did tell you.
Okay.
Is that right?
I believe
You
so.
call and she gave you the name of the.
Yeah.
She mentioned it's the homeowners association, and she said she thought there were video cameras somewhere around the scene of the murder. Correct?
I'll agree with you. Yeah.
And she gave you the name of some Leslie Hamilton and even a phone number and so forth to contact. Is
Yes.
that right?
Correct.
So she was providing you with information about cameras that perhaps had videoed or caught the two suspects coming up the street, correct?
Sure. Yes.
And you eventually did obtain those videos, correct?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
There was a residence that was right there that had access to those videos, and they were recovered.
And you know how long that took?
It was that night. We had copies of it.
And were able to view them?
Yes.
Okay. And we've seen the video of those two individuals jogging up the street, correct?
I think the only thing I've seen in court here was a still image of it.
Okay. But there was a video of that as well.
Oh, yes.
And that video showed the individuals, when you adjust for time, and no one's questioning the times that you've given us after the adjustments. It was about 4:18 in the afternoon that you first see the two persons jogging up the street, correct?
I believe you're correct, yes.
All right. And how far approximately would it have been, if you know, from where they were first seen on the corner there to arrive at the home of Semintilli?
20, 30 seconds, I would say.
Okay. And then at some point, obviously, they had to enter the location.
Correct.
Now, in your investigation, either initially at the scene or sometime thereafter, were you able to determine, or at least in your mind, what route the two individuals had taken in order to get to Fabio Sementilli in the backyard or the patio?
Not exactly.
At some point, you believe that they had gone around the back and got him from behind. Is that correct?
That was the most likely scenario, yes.
Okay. And did you at all calculate about how long it would have taken for two individuals jogging up to have taken that route and confronted Fabio Sementilli?
I mean, if they did it without any kind of waiting, I would assume it would be very quick.
Okay.
I didn't run it myself to judge.
Now, can you tell us what time it was again that the video caught the Porsche vehicle leaving the residence?
I can look at my notes if you'd like.
If you would, please.
The time the Porsche leaves,
Yes.
correct? 16:53 hours.
That'd be 4:53 in the afternoon.
Yes.
And we know the 911 call was made about 5 o'clock, is that right? Or a few minutes before, do you know?
Roughly, Isabella got home about a minute later, so the 911 call went out quickly after that, yes.
And when you see she got in a minute later, can you place a time on that?
Well, on the camera, you can see the vehicle arrive at 4:54, so 1 minute later. So with time to get out of the vehicle, walk into the house, I mean, it's fairly quick after that.
So 1 minute after the two killers leave the location, Isabella Sementilli arrives at the house. Is that correct?
Correct.
That gave the killers about a minute to escape, correct?
Correct.
And Monica Semintilli arrived shortly thereafter, say 5 o'clock, is that correct?
I have it on the video at 5:03.
Okay. So, based on what you previously told us, without any further information, the killers would have had how much time to travel from the front location or coming up the street in the back in order to commit the killing, the murder?
So from the time they are seen on video running around the corner to the time the Porsche is seen driving away, we have, let's see here, 35 minutes, if I'm doing my math correctly.
But you had some additional information regarding a time when Fabio Sementilli was still alive during that period. Is that right?
Correct.
You had information that he had placed a phone call to his company at 4:46 in the afternoon. Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure of the time. I don't think that sounds correct. I thought it was prior to. Do you have something you can show me? That would help out. But I believe it was prior
Well,
to.
you don't have that?
4:30. I don't. Sorry, I don't.
All right. I will find that for you.
Okay.
But rather than do it at this time, let's assume we're talking about 4:45, 4:46.
Okay. I'm not sure that's correct, but go ahead.
I promise you I'll
Okay.
okay. For the sake of this question, if it is correct, then and he was alive at 4:46, then it would have been only a few minutes after that the murder had taken place, correct?
Assuming that's correct, yes.
And again, by that timetable, the murderers would have had approximately a minute or two to commit the murder, leave the location, and escape.
I'm going to object at this point because it assumes facts, not evidence.
I received this as a hypothetical.
It's an improper hypothetical, Your Honor, because it's not based on fact.
I'm not so sure. It's overruled.
You understand the question?
So you're saying no? Repeat it, please.
Assuming the time is correct, a phone call is made at 4:46. You said the Porsche was seen leaving at what time?
At 4:53.
That would have left at a maximum, assuming the murder occurred right after the phone call and there was no time in between, about missing or anything of that nature.
Again, I believe that was done the following morning.
Okay. You left that for Detective Bucknell.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let me correct myself. The phone call, it appears, the message from Fabio Sementilli was at 4:27.
Correct.
That sound better?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So it would have been from 4:27 to the time that the Porsche was seen leaving the location at 4:53.
4:53.
That whatever occurred between that period of time. Fabio Sementilli was alive at 4:27.
I would certainly assume so.
Okay. As soon as you knew that the Porsche vehicle was missing and had been driven away, was there some, I forget what they call it from my old days when watching Highway Patrol, APB or some notification, look for that car?
So we don't use that terminology.
I know.
But yes, we put it out to the divisions that there was a vehicle taken in a homicide. We put what's called a felony stop on the vehicle. Although in this case it's difficult, there was no license plate attached to it. It had paper plates. So we put out the fact that there were paper plates on a black Porsche 911, which is a very, I would say, unique vehicle. And that's how it works.
And did you get any hits on that notification that vehicle had been seen or stopped by any officers or anyone
No.
else? You had checked, I assume, other video cameras in the area?
We did. It was a long process. There were a lot of residences that led up to Ventura Boulevard. So going back to the video, the vehicle's last seen going northbound in Oakdale. Oakdale leads out to, essentially, if you kept going north, you'd run into Ventura Boulevard. However, there's a east-west street called Wells Drive, I believe it is, that's a major artery south of Ventura Boulevard. So if you get to Wells Drive, you can make a east or west turn, or you can keep going north. But if you go east or west, there's multiple routes to get back to Ventura Boulevard. So this made us this video gathering very tedious.
And did it produce any results, though? In other words, had the Porsche been seen or caught in any video following the time it was seen leaving the residence and going down the Victoria?
As I sit here today, I don't recall, but I do recall that we made multiple attempts, and anything we saw was, as it pertained to our investigation, pretty inconsequential with video recovery.
What do you mean inconsequential with video?
Like, as far as the Porsche itself, we didn't recover anything that was going to help us aid in where that Porsche ultimately went to.
But it would aid you in knowing if there was any DNA in the vehicle that matched anyone on the data bank, which eventually you said matched Mr. Baker. Is
The
that
video
correct?
itself?
No, to find the Porsche vehicle to obtain any evidence from it.
Right, but you got to understand something.
Sure.
Okay? There's two of us that are working this case. And we have limited time within a day to go out and do all this stuff. So for me to go door knock 10 residences with cameras, it's doable. But that's going to require multiple days just to recover video. Because I got to watch the video before I can recover it, correct?
Okay.
So it takes a long time to do this. So it's not something that happens like this.
Understood.
Yeah.
And your personnel to assist you at that time was limited to yourself and Detective Parshall?
We did have some partners that we work with in our unit. However, they have their own cases. So I can ask them to go out and get stuff. Like we sent them out to LA Fitness and Target and Ralph's because we had particular time frames we could look at. And generally, with their systems, it's easy to recover because they have people that work loss prevention that can assist us with that. When I go to somebody's house, I don't know the system I'm working with. I got to figure that part out. I got to figure out if it's even recoverable. So there's multiple things that go into recovering systems from people's residences versus going to a business.
Okay. So between the night of the killing until the time you got the DNA results, how many days was that, approximately?
I'm sorry, just to make sure I'm understanding this correct. From the night of the killing to the time we got the results, or
Yes.
from the time the vehicle was recovered?
Yeah, the vehicle was recovered how many days later?
2 days later.
Okay. And how far was it from the scene of the murder?
I believe 3, maybe 4 miles, roughly.
And was it in plain view, or was it in any way hidden in some way? Did you notice?
It was parked on I would call it a pretty rural residential street in the city of Los Angeles. These are bigger properties, but not well traveled.
Okay. And that car was immediately impounded for evidence to be recovered, if possible, from the interior of the vehicle.
Correct.
And I assume among the evidence recovered was blood from the interior of the Porsche.
Yes, there were red stains inside the Porsche.
Were you present when that was done, or was that done by some other crime lab personnel?
I was present at the impound yard when the recovery was taking place, and I believe it was Kwan that recovered.
Okay. And was there blood elsewhere besides the driver's side of the vehicle? In other words, in the passenger side?
Yeah, I don't recall. I don't believe so.
What about, obviously, you had a lot of blood from the house, from the garage, kitchen area, patio area, and so forth.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. By the time you had recovered the Porsche, had you any results yet from any of the blood that had been recovered from the home?
No.
But I take it that was a priority immediately. Is that correct?
It was put in on a rush,
Okay.
but we don't dictate even what that means, or even if we get a rush on a case.
Okay. A rush means that it has to be transferred to what? Crime lab, DNA.
That we were asking for priority.
Okay.
There's thousands of cases in the city of Los Angeles that are all requesting DNA analysis on their cases, and we are asking for priority.
But this was your case.
It was myself and my partner.
Detective Parshall was designated the lead detective.
That is correct.
And he remained so throughout the time that you worked on the case. Is that right?
I mean, ultimately, it was transferred, I believe, somewhere in March to Robbery Homicide Division.
Okay, but we heard he had unfortunately passed away. That was after the work of you and he on this case. Is that correct?
August 21st, 2019.
Okay. And the arrest took place on?
June 14th, 2017, I believe.
Okay. So, for the time in which, after the arrest, did you remain on the case with Detective Parshall?
I was partners with Detective Parshall up until the time of his passing.
And during that period of time, I take it there was obviously an interest in trying to determine who the second killer was. Is that correct?
Yes, as far as the second person seen running up the street, absolutely.
Yes. You believe he was a participant, assuming it was a he, in the murder of Fabio Sementilli?
Well, we assumed they were in on it together. Yes, I don't know who did what at the time, but we assumed they were in on the crime together. Correct.
Okay. Now, between the time that you were present to examine the crime scene and the Porsche was recovered, or let me say the DNA was matched, what did you or Detective Parshall do to try to attempt to locate or identify the second killer?
Repeat your question one more time, please.
What did you do to try to identify the second individual?
You gave me some date and time frames.
Between the time that you were first there, the night of the killing, until you got the DNA results back identifying Mr. Baker.
Well, it's a little bit loaded question, sir. We didn't have anything, so we were looking at everything from burglary crews to gang members in South LA. We had no idea what we had, so
Okay.
We were doing everything possible to attempt to find out who either one of those individuals were.
Still operating on the assumption that it could have been a no-knock burglary, correct?
Absolutely.
And that's what you told Monica Semintilli that you were looking for primarily, correct?
Yes, and I want to make sure we get the terminology correct. It's not no knock; it would be knock knock.
Knock knock.
Correct.
Sorry.
Yes.
And knock knock meaning just a random burglary. Knock knock meaning you find out if someone's home. You tell me.
Yeah. So at the time of this, when this case occurred, there was, and for years prior and probably years after, there was a series of burglaries that were happening not only in the San Fernando Valley area but in other areas of the city. Essentially, where crews, usually of 3 people, would arrive at a neighborhood. They would go up to houses that I would assume they have checked out before. I'm not sure, but they'd go up to the front door. They'd knock on the residence. If there was no answer, they would go around the back of the residence, usually break in through a sliding glass door, burglarize the residence, and leave with the property. They were known as the Flockers, but they were the knock-knock burglary crews.
And for how long would you say you investigated that as being one of the possible reasons for the burglary or the killing of Fabio Sementilli?
How long?
Yes, at some point you made a decision that this was not done by knock-knock burglars.
Yeah, I think it was February 14, 2017.
All right.
Yeah.
So you get the DNA results matching Mr. Baker, correct?
Correct.
There are no results matching a second individual.
That's correct.
You get information that Monica Semintilli had not been truthful with you about her contact with Mr. Baker. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I believe you made the statement something it appeared she was a little too friendly with Mr. Baker, correct?
Did I say that?
Yes.
Oh, when did I say that?
Previously when you were...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, sure, it sounds like something I could say.
Okay.
Yes.
And you had seen a photograph of Mr. Baker being at the family residence, is that correct?
Correct.
And he had, you said he had a Band-Aid on his finger, is that correct?
It appeared there was something on his finger, yes, in one of the photos.
Okay. So that in conjunction with what you had heard from Jessica caused you to believe that Monica Semintilli was not being honest with you about her relationship with Mr. Baker,
Correct.
that she was concealing it.
Yes.
Did you confront her with that?
No.
Can I